demographics no longer have the guaranteed head start. Patriarchy is failing.
First of all, go check out the full video, okay, of the stitch. Secondly, I could not wait to do this video, okay, because I am not going to be politically correct right now. I'm just going to tell it straight up how it is. White people were literally handed generational wealth that was funded by our government. How many of y'all are familiar with public housing and Section 8, right, and welfare? Well, literally, they use this to actually build wealth for the white community. So after the Great Depression, right, a lot of people in our country was struggling, okay? White people were literally living in tents because they couldn't afford their mortgages and they couldn't afford to live, all right? And of course, black people were struggling even worse. Federal public housing program started as part of the Housing Act of 1937, passed during the New Deal. First intended to be a jobs program and slums clearing effort, public housing was the result of powerful grassroots organizing, okay? So originally, public housing, welfare, things like that were not created for black people. They were actually created for white people. And literally, they were able to receive all of these benefits even if they weren't actually low income. So it was basically a lot of white families, husband and wife, that were living in these communities. Now, in the 1960s, a man by the name of Whitney M Young actually came along. He was a social worker and all about the civil rights movement, okay? He took over the Urban League. He did a lot of work in bringing about the Fair Housing Act so that black people could have access to these housing benefits, okay? Such as public housing. Then in 1949, under the office's guidance, an act was passed, the First Housing Act. This act came out of President Truman's Fair Deal. The goal was to provide enough funds to rid neighborhoods of slums and develop new housing. The new housing was mostly developed for the World War II veterans and did not provide much aid to those who were not. In fact, the act did not aid those in slum areas, but instead dislodged them from their homes and forced many low-income families to find new residence. A second housing act was passed in 1954 when President Eisenhower held office. This act was a huge turning point because it focused on conserving and rehabilitating the slum areas. Then later, the Housing Act of 1956 made amends for the First Housing Act by giving relocation payments to all who were displaced. Now, who was displaced was actually low-income Caucasian families. It's important to note that up until this point, public housing was discriminatory. The majority of the previous acts were of no aid to minority groups and instead focused on Caucasians, and often those not of the lowest economic status. In fact, through the 1950s, very strict policies were in place in many housing facilities. Pregnant women who were not married could be evicted, and property damage was charged with outrageous fines. So originally, to receive welfare, you could not be a single mom. Whitney M Young Jr. and other civil rights leaders actually marched, okay, and abdicated for single black moms to be able to receive these benefits because it was desperately needed in our community due to a very, very high unemployment rate of black males in the black community. If you want more information on this, please check out this article. It was written in 1983 and takes you all the way back into the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. There were many who observed, like Miriam, a Harlem resident who did not want her last name used, that while they were able to make a living, their men were not. He used to say, "You're going here, there, and everywhere, and I'm going nowhere." Okay? So this is about the unemployment that black men were facing for decades. Now back to how our government helped white people achieve generational wealth. A 1939 report estimated that the FHA, Fair Housing Act, helps 12 million people improve their housing conditions, but that benefit was out of reach for millions more, okay? In his 2017 book, The Color of Law, author Richard Rothstein called the FHA a state-sponsored system of discrimination that was primarily designed to provide housing to white middle class, lower class families. Lower middle class, y'all, sorry. The FHA refused to insure mortgages in African American neighborhoods and required homes built by FHA loans to be sold only to white families. A policy known as redlining. Today, American cities continue to struggle with the intergenerational impact of redlining, segregated neighborhoods, and discriminatory lender practices. So basically, these Fair Housing Act loans were the basis of Section 8. They gave the white community money to be able to purchase homes. And home ownership creates what? Generational wealth. And then they moved the black people into the projects and the ghettos. That's how they created the suburbs and the hood. They gave them homes and gave us the projects and the ghettos.